Okay, great. We're going to get going. We already have about 70 people who have joined us out of the 90 plus that enrolled. Good afternoon. This is the 2024 Illinois Works Pre-Apprenticeship Program Closeout Process Meeting. We're going to be discussing a variety of very important items here related to the 2024 program year closeout process. I'm Norman Ruano, Deputy Director of the Office of Illinois Works, and with me today are several team members from the Illinois Works Pre-Apprenticeship Program team. So first I'll introduce Dan Martinez, who's going to be one of our persons delivering this presentation today. Dan, if you could please say hi to people.
Of course. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our closeout meeting, and look forward to talking to you in a little bit.
Great, thanks, Dan. We also have with us Monica Pruitt, who is one of the grant managers that has also worked with you. She'll be part of our presentation today. Monica, if you can please say hi.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Great.
Thanks.
We also have with us Heather Harrison, who you have probably seen a lot of her emails already. She's financial grant manager with the Office of Illinois Works. We'll be working with all of you in the coming year and ensuring that your budget modifications, your grant agreements, your PFRs, PPRs, payments are all processed. Heather, if you could please say hi to our audience today.
Thank you, Norman. Hello, everybody. I'm Heather, and very grateful to be here, and looking forward to working with you in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. And also with us today is a new grant manager. I have been mentioning for a few weeks now that we were onboarding several grant managers. And with us today is Edwin Sanchez, who's a new grant manager. On the programmatic side, he will be working with several of you this coming year to help you implement your program and ensuring that we're staying compliant with our guidance. Edwin, if we could please say hi to our audience today.
Yeah, thank you, Norman. Good afternoon, everyone. Look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you, Edwin. Thanks for joining us. So the focus of our conversation, as I mentioned, we've come to the end of our program year now. At the end of December 31st is the end of our 2024 program year. We wanted to take the time to discuss closeout, how the closeout will go this program year. Dan, if you don't mind going on to the next slide, please. We're going to be discussing the closeout process and timeline. We're going to be discussing closeout preparations, the closeout checklist, and then also closeout funds. Just a reminder, there's a significant amount of money tied up in the closeout process, not only for your grant individually, but also in general for our network. A couple of $1 million get tied up in the closeout process. We want to make sure that this closeout process is as seamless, as effective as possible. We want to make sure that we release all of the closeout money that is tied up based on your grant agreement. But to be able to do that, we need to make sure that we go through this process successfully. We will also want to ensure that this process is done quickly. We have obviously onboarding activities already planned out for January and February related to new grantees and also related to renewal grantees. So we just want to make sure that the faster we do this, the more successfully we do it, the less time it takes. This year, we absolutely have to publish the state mandated, the legally mandated annual report for each grantee in April. And as a result, we need to be able to finish this according to the timeline that Dan will discuss in a minute. So I just wanted to emphasize that we need resources to be put into this process, and we need it to be done successfully. One of the key things that we have learned in the last couple of years of closeout processes is that if it's not done successfully by the deadline, anything after that drags the whole system and it gets very complicated. So we really want to make sure that all of our grantees go through that process. The other thing you should know, based on our strategic plan, it was our goal that this coming year, program year 2025, we would be operating at maximum capacity. And maximum capacity means 40 to 45 grantees throughout the state of Illinois, covering all economic development regions with capacity to train up to 2,000 Illinois residents. I am very, very glad to announce that we have succeeded in doing that. We will have several new grantees that will be joining us. You'll get to meet them in our onboarding activities in January. But we will be operating with 42 grantees, capacity for about 2,000 people this coming year. And we have coverage now throughout the state of Illinois in the areas that we needed coverage. So it's very exciting. It's going to be a good program year for all of us. And we look forward to working with all of you in this upcoming program year. But before we get there, obviously, we have to finalize this closeout process. So we would appreciate if you would put significant attention, pay significant attention, and also rally the resources to ensure this happens. So thanks again. I'll hand it over to Dan, who will go over the details of what we're going to be doing as part of our closeout process.
Great. Thank you very much, Norman. All right. So next step, we're going to discuss the process itself. So it's important to understand that we need to clear up all of the data in IWRS, ensuring that it's accurate and up to date. We want to verify not only that all the information has been entered, but also that it's been entered accurately. And as Norman alluded to, as we'll discuss again at the very end, closeout funds are a direct part of the grant. It is in each grant agreement, it breaks down that, enrollment is worth 25%, completion's worth 30%, transitions are worth 35%. The closeout funding is worth 10%. And I should make the note that that is the typical grant agreement. There are different agreements for individuals or individual organizations that had advances, and certainly for accelerator organizations, they had advances generally that also changed the scope of that closeout fund. So it was no longer at 10%, but that's the general basis for it. So it's really important to perform all of that information, or to get all that information into IWRS accurately and completely. So we're going to need your help with that. Fortunately, I'm going to move on to the timeline because it helps us understand it. Fortunately, the monthly compliance is really part of closeout. So we refer to it internally as a rolling closeout. So every month that we're conducting compliance and we're able to verify enrollment, we're able to verify completion, we're able to verify transitions, that all builds to the closeout of IWRS for the 2024 grant year. And so it's really important that all of the verification worksheets have any flag that has appeared at all through the grant year, that all those flags are cleared. And occasionally an organization may have received conditional verification on something, and on the condition that this was entered or that was entered or this was corrected. One of the prime examples that probably apply to almost every grantee is that all completion verifications were conditional upon the satisfaction survey, the participant satisfaction survey, being completed by your graduates, your participants. So all of those things need to be cleared, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But that is the most important thing to get closeout started on the right foot. That should, that's always something that should have occurred. Every month those flags should be cleared. And so every organization should be working very hard to ensure that every single flag has been cleared as of December 31st. Now, most of you are, I think all of you are still waiting for your December compliance reports, which will update those flags. But, you know, essentially the requirements for, say, enrollment verification do not change, right? They've been out there. And so if you had a flag that was issued to you in August, unless that has been cleared, that flag still stands. So you don't need the December compliance report to know that that flag still exists and that if you haven't cleared it, it needs to be cleared. So that's the first part of this timeline. January 8th will be the final monthly compliance poll for the 2024 grant year. And that will be then the expectation that we're able to run through compliance. Every individual that graduated should receive a completion verification. There should be no more flags left to identify. Even if it's the first time that they're appearing on a compliance monthly poll, there are some schools that are just finishing their program. So the January compliance poll will be the first time that a participant is in a complete status. So it's the first time they're appearing on the compliance poll for a completion or transition verification. We all know what those requirements are to get a completion verification. So the expectation is that everyone will be verified on January 8th. If there are any questions about that, definitely reach out to your grant manager as quickly as possible to get those questions answered. By January 31st, the compliance reports will be issued. The intent is to issue those with an eye on closeout. So it'll start to expand what we're looking at, and that's really where the monthly compliance, you will see it merge with the closeout because they are one and the same. And then the expectation is that throughout January, the grant managers are then verifying all of that information. And we're going to go through it all today to take a look at what, in addition to the monthly compliance information, what the grant managers will be looking at. And then the goal is to provide those closeout reports to the grantees along with a final compliance report. So we can provide you with a final compliance score for the grant year and issue those in March, along with the closeout reimbursement maximum being provided to the financial grant management team. And so that those can be part of your, reimbursement eligibility. And then, as Norman mentioned, in April, the 2024 annual reports must be published. And those are based on, verified completions, verified transitions, and all applicant data. So that's why those cannot be published until we finish compliance. And again, they are mandated to be completed by April of 2025. I think that's, I go on to questions. Yeah, I do. So before I move off this screen, are there any questions about this timeline? Feel free to place something in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and just ask the question.
So far, there's nothing in the chat, Dan.
Okay. Yeah, we've covered the easy part so far, so I'm glad.
Right.
Save the questions for later. All right. So what can you do right now to prepare for closeout? So again, the first item are those monthly compliance flags, but it's also important to understand what statuses should be in your IWRS profile for the 2024 grant year. So the first thing to recognize are applicants, right? If you had somebody applying into your program in May, they shouldn't still be an applicant. If you interviewed them and they were accepted into your program, then at some point they should have been moved to an enrolled status, right? If they were not eligible to participate in the program, they should move into one of the not enrolled statuses. So so that's one of the things we're going to be looking for. And again, this really helps you to understand, for those of you who haven't gone through closeout before, what it is we're trying to do. We're trying to close all open issues in IWRS, and having someone say they're applying to your 2024 program would seriously be an open issue because the 2024 programs are all closed. So first, you want to take a look at whether or not you have any 2024 applicants out there. The next is, I just mentioned, if they were accepted to your program, then they should have been enrolled, right? Well, that's great, but once the last cohort has ended per your work plan, and unless you are a school, all work plans have completed, there cannot be anybody still in an enrolled status. Instruction is over, right? So either they graduated from your program and you have all of the data in IWRS accurately entered, accurately uploaded, then they can be moved to a complete status, such as complete or complete and in transition. Or if they did not, then they need to be moved to an incomplete status. So, and we're going to talk a lot about the incomplete status because that is a status that does not get reviewed during monthly compliance, but we need to make sure that all of the data is accurate for those individuals as well. All right. So I guess I will take questions as I go through this because if you have I don't want to go on too far before I answer anyone's questions. So any questions about applicant or enrolled statuses?
Dan,
All
we
right.
don't have any questions in the chat about the statuses, but I do just want to point out the fact that there was a question regarding when the grantees will receive their December compliance reports, which you spoke about just a few minutes ago. So the goal is to have all of those reports distributed by December 22nd, which I realize is late. However, Dan made the point earlier that, you know, a lot of the flags that are there have been there for some time. So certainly you don't need to receive your December report before you get started with resolving those flags. So, you know, if you have anything outstanding from a previous month, please just go ahead and focus on working on those until you get your new reports.
Exactly. And we're about to give you a whole bunch of other work to do. So you'll have that. You'll have that to look forward to.
Absolutely. But there were no other questions.
Okay, great. So then another status, you know, I talked about if a person had been an applicant, you know, that they can be moved to a not enrolled status. Make sure you understand the differences between the three not enrolled. The definitions are provided in the grantee manual. Make sure that if you move an individual to a not enrolled status, that a case note is entered surrounding the details of why they were moved to that status, right? So, you know, very often, you know, individuals that apply to the program, you know, say that they can provide the eligibility documentation, but then it turns out they can't. And so that's a reason why you may have moved them to not enrolled. Now, if you had interviewed them and they scored high enough and they were actually offered a spot in your program, then they would become an administrative withdrawal, which I'll talk about in a second. There are instances where they were conditionally offered a spot in your program, and then they were not able to provide or resolve that condition within the set amount of time that you had given them. And so they need to be removed from an enrolled status back to a not enrolled status. And you have to be very careful in understanding, you know, why that is and when that should happen. And again, case notes really need to explain the details surrounding any of those changes. I just mentioned if an individual, you know, scores above a 32 and has the eligibility requirements and is offered a spot in the program, but does not show up for that first day of class, then they are considered an administrative withdrawal. Okay. This status only applies to people that qualified for the program. If they did not qualify for the program, they are not enrolled. But if they qualified for the program, you offered them a spot, but they did not show up for the first day of class or any subsequent class, they are an administrative withdrawal. So both of those have a little asterisk there, and that is because it's very important to understand that no grant funds can be reimbursed for individuals that are in those two statuses, right? So that means if you paid them a stipend, if you provided them with a wraparound service at some point, if your program paid for them to get their first aid CPR certification, unfortunately, they were never an eligible participant in the Illinois Works program. So not only can we not verify their enrollment and your organization receive performance funding, but even on the expensing side, they cannot be part of the PFR reimbursement submission because they were never Illinois Works participants. So that's very important to understand. Any questions about that? Okay. Hopefully I'm telling you something you all knew already. So the statuses that then we would expect to see are for individuals that graduated. The first one is complete, although this one should be very rare, right? So a person that successfully completed instruction, so in other words, they graduated from your program, but they have not received any transition services, would be put in a complete status. Of course, as you all know, they're required to receive transition services. So if they haven't already, that should have been a very temporary thing, and they definitely need to receive that transition service, at which point you can then put them in complete and in transition, right? But transition services should happen definitely within the last 3 to 4 weeks of the programming, but should happen at any time during the cohort. So we never really want to see that status. Complete and in transition, that is the primary status we expect to see. And in fact, that's the one we expect to see before post-program active tracking, right? Someone shouldn't just go from enrolled to post-program active tracking, which I'll touch on in a moment. But that complete and in transition means they graduated and they received a transition service. Keep in mind, none of this was talking about a transition document, okay? Transition documents are something completely different from a transition service. They're related, right? So when you upload a transition document, there are required transition services that need to be entered. So in that way, they are related. But in terms of this status, this does not pertain to whether or not a transition document has been uploaded. And then we have post-program active tracking. So this is a status that is only for participants that have successfully completed instruction. You should not have a post-program active tracking status for an individual that dropped out and incomplete. Someone cannot go from enrolled to post-program active tracking. They first must go through that complete and in transition status. And the way an individual gets moved from complete and in transition to post-program active tracking is when an active tracking questionnaire has been entered in the completion/follow-up tab of that participant's profile. So as you all know, grantees are required to follow up with their participants every 90 days for 1 year after their graduation. If we were operating closeout right now, that would mean that would really apply to anyone that had completed in mid-September. But keep in mind, we are going to be really starting, closeout, reviewing that material in February. So the expectation would be that anyone that completed their instruction and graduated, by November 1st, which should be everybody, unless you're a couple of school programs, again, that we're allowed to continue. Any questions about these completion statuses?
There are no questions.
Okay, excellent. So let's move on to the next one. So I mentioned that we were going to talk about training services in a little bit more depth. So it's important to know essentially the same items that we look for a completion that we do verify on during the monthly compliance data pulls. We are going to look at those same items for an individual that is an incomplete. Now, the difference is that we expect that some of the things will not have been completed, right? But if they completed their first aid CPR and their Illinois Works orientation, and that's it, right? They're now an incomplete participant. They dropped out. But under those two modules, we would expect to see all of the training information. How many hours did they attend that Illinois Works orientation? How many hours did they attend the first aid CPR? For the first aid CPR, did they receive their first aid CPR certification? If so, that needs to be uploaded just like a graduate's would. The credential would also need to be placed on that first aid CPR. And those two modules, the Illinois Works orientation and the first aid CPR, assuming they had the required hours and the satisfactory post-assessment, those training modules should be have a status of successful completion. The other training modules would have that the person didn't attend or didn't complete would have a status of either unsuccessful completion or planned not started. So unsuccessful completion means that they did attend maybe 1 hour of the OSHA 10, and that's when they dropped out, right? Well, they attended for 1 hour. So you would mark that as a 1 hour and mark it as unsuccessful completion. Enter your case note that was when the participant dropped out of the class and never came back. And that's how you close that service for that training module. The rest of the training modules that the person never even stepped foot into can be listed as planned not started. So that's how you close out the training module services. The training services goal itself will always be off track / incomplete. So instead of having a complete status like a graduate, it should say off track / incomplete. And I'm saying it should always say that because if not, then they should probably be a graduate, right? If they did complete all of those other courses, then the training services goal would be complete. And I already touched on the fact that, if they earned their OSHA 10 and they earned their first aid CPR, but then they dropped out, well, those certificates must be uploaded. Just to give you a little, insight, part of this is because they can always come back. They can come back maybe to your program, or they could go to a different program and complete the Illinois Works Pre-Apprenticeship Program. And we need to know where they dropped off, what they've completed and what they haven't. Not to get too far into those details, because that's not the subject that we're covering here, but essentially, those individuals wouldn't be eligible for stipends for training classes that they did successfully complete, right? There's no point in the state continuing to fund training for somebody that has successfully completed within our own program certain training modules. All they need to do is complete the new ones, the ones that they were not able to complete or not start next year or the year after. So any questions about this, about the training goal for an individual that dropped out?
We don't have anything in the chat.
Nice. Okay. Well, then let's talk about the wraparound services and student support services for those individuals. So, just like on the training services side, the wraparound services, student support services, and transition services must also be placed in a final status. So the question becomes, did you provide the wraparound service to that individual? If you did, then that service should be marked as successful completion. If you did not, then you have to choose one of the two: evaluated not required or unsuccessful completion. Now, it's really important to understand what can happen here with the wraparound services, right? So, for example, if the person had requested childcare and wound up leaving your program, the initial question will become, well, did they drop out because they didn't have proper childcare support? Right? So, if you didn't provide it to them, then why not? Right? Was it that you offered it, but the student didn't need it and they dropped out for a reason unrelated to that childcare? That would be, you would mark it as unsuccessful completion because you did offer it to them. They chose not to take it. But if your organization never even got the opportunity to offer it to them because they dropped out too soon, or your organization didn't approach that individual yet to offer it, that's evaluated not required. Wait, just mix those two up. All right, so let me start again. If your organization did not provide the service to them, that is an unsuccessful completion, right? And it's your organization that did not do that, and you need to explain why and whether or not in the case note it impacted that individual's reason for not completing. If you offered it to them, but they did not need it, that's evaluated not required. And again, you still need to explain why it was evaluated not required. This holds true for anybody, not just incomplete. All right. One of the things that we cannot have is a case note saying not needed. That's what not required means. We get it. It was evaluated not required. The question is why. That's what needs to be in the case note. And that holds true, again, for wraparound services, student support services, and transition services. Any services that are already in that participant's goals. And then if any of those goals, were marked as evaluated not required or unsuccessful completion, the wraparound, student support, and transition goals must be changed to off-track incomplete as well, just like the training service would be. Any questions about those before I talk about stipends?
No questions.
Okay. So stipends must have been paid to all participants, even if they only showed up for that first day of class. The Illinois Works Orientation, that's a stipendable class, that they should be paid that stipend. So just like for any other student, the graduates, all the stipends must be entered in the dollar value of service of the program stipend service within the program stipend goal. So if all of the stipends that were due, so certainly not all of the stipends for the course because the person dropped out, but if all of the stipends that were due that participant were paid, then that goal should be marked as successful completion, or the service as successful completion, and then the goal can be marked as complete. If the stipends that were due that individual were not paid, maybe they left and would have no further contact with you, they wouldn't come in and pick up their stipend payment, you don't have a forwarding address for them, you could not pay their stipend, you've tried and tried, then you'll have to mark that as unsuccessful completion and enter a case note as to why you could not pay the stipend. Keep in mind, it is still owed to that person, and they may come back for that. And then the goal itself would be marked as off-track incomplete. Any questions regarding the stipend?
No questions.
Okay. So here's where there's some of the work to be done for December and January. So in addition to any of those compliance flags that we talked about, there are several things that we are going to be looking at during closeout that are not part of monthly compliance. So I just talked about incompleters and all of their data. So that all needs to be resolved. Then for for all participants that enrolled in the program, of course, there needs to be a high school diploma, right? Now that is something that's checked as part of monthly compliance. So we want to make sure that that has been done for all of those enrollments. A lot of that will be re-verified during closeout. Also, for completion, for anybody that completed their OSHA 10 course, we must have their OSHA 10 cards. So I spoke before about conditional verifications. We allow OSHA 10 certifications to be conditionally verified, just like a certification, but we need the actual card as part of closeout. So any organization that had not uploaded the OSHA 10 construction cards for their participants needs to do that for every single participant. And then, of course, transition documents. For those of you that are in the transition service coordinator monthly meetings, they've heard me talk about this over and over again. The goal is that every person that graduates has a transition document, right? Certainly the Illinois Works Pre-Apprenticeship Program expectation or primary goal is for individuals to apply to and enroll in a registered apprenticeship program. But what about the rest of them, right? What about an individual that goes through the program? They thought for the last 10 years that they wanted to be a plumber. They go through the program, they get some hands-on experience, and they realize that construction just isn't for them. They thought it was for the last decade, but it's not. And they've decided to go on to education or manufacturing or STEM. Those people still need a path, right? Maybe they're enrolling in a college, or maybe they're getting a job while they get that other part of their life sorted out. We don't want to just transition people to a couch, right? Then those are secondary transitions, and essentially anyone that's not a primary transition should be a secondary transition. So that is the goal, and that's what we're going to be checking for during closeout. Another big one, and this is one that all grantees should have in their paper files that we are requiring to be uploaded to IWRS for us to verify during closeout, is eligibility documentation. So we need to see their legal name, we need to see that they are a resident of Illinois, and we need to see their birth date in order to verify that they were over 18 at the time of enrollment. For high school programs, it's at the time of completion. So all of that needs to be uploaded to IWRS, and then that will allow us to begin the process of checking each and every one of the participants in the IWRS database. And again, that is for anyone that was ever enrolled in your program. So individuals that are incomplete, this applies to. Individuals that are complete and in transition, this applies to. If they're an administrative withdrawal or if they're not enrolled, then this wouldn't apply to them. If they're an administrative withdrawal, then they should still have this information, because again, what an administrative withdrawal is saying is that they were eligible to be part of the program. They were offered a spot. They just were not. They just never showed up. They dropped out before it even began. So that's going to be a really important and massive undertaking for everyone involved. Then we have the participant satisfaction survey. We've been telling grantees all along they need to keep reaching out to their graduates to get them to enter those surveys. So one of the intentions that we have is to provide the grantees with their completion rate. Hopefully we can do that in January. But the goal is to hit a 75% completion for each grantee. So that's for all of their cohorts combined, 75% for the year. And then attendance rosters. So, I know a lot of grantees had uploaded all their attendance rosters for their first cohort, their second cohort, and then, the third cohort, which had just ended. It seems like some have forgotten because that their graduates are just going through compliance verification now. That is a requirement of any individual in a cohort to receive completion verification, is that the attendance rosters have been uploaded to the grantee details, cohort details page of IWRS. And then those active tracking questionnaires. As I mentioned, this is not something that we check on during monthly compliance, but it is something we check for closeout. Every 90 days after graduation, grantees are required to reach out to their graduates, just their graduates, and enter an active tracking follow-up. I mentioned that because some grantees have said, well, we reach out to everyone. Everyone that dropped out of our class, we're reaching out to. That is fantastic. Every organization should do that. Certainly, if you are renewed or have gone through the NOFO process and are going to be with us for programming in 2025, hopefully you can bring those individuals back. But those should be entered as case notes. That is not an active tracking follow-up. Active tracking is only for graduates of the Illinois Works Pre-Apprenticeship Program. So any questions with these activities that all grantees should be working on, for the rest of the month and into January?
Dan, Rahid from Lumity had his hand raised a little bit ago. So Rahid, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question, now would be a great time.
Yep, I'm here. So a quick question about the ones who we do say like they don't want to do construction anymore, and they found out, oh, this is just something that's not for me anymore, and they're transitioning out into something different. If we find them a job or they find something within that every 90 days, so that year of post programming, we should still be uploading that and reporting where their current status is, correct?
Right. And that is because we want to support all of our graduates in every way. And we don't want to just assume that because somebody has found a nice job, working for Amazon at $60,000 a year, that they're not ready to go back. Maybe 6 months later, they're like, you know what? I've built my confidence up. Now I have a little bit more of a financial cushion. I can go to, apply to plumbers and, go back to that. So people change their mind all the time, and we want to continue to support them. And especially, so it runs the whole spectrum, but especially we found that individuals that do even get enrolled into a registered apprenticeship program, that is so important to follow up with them and make sure that they have a support network, right? Those are your alumni, and having a connection with you and reaching back out to them to support them in their journey is really important. So it doesn't matter whether they're a secondary transition or all the way to people that are actually enrolled as an apprentice. We need to continue to follow up with them, and certainly our career services team will take that on 1 year after their graduation. And as you've worked with them, the career services team, that they're very actively involved in trying to support all of our graduates. So we need to continue to do that active tracking.
Thank you.
That was a good question. Thank you. All right. So we will have a tool that,
Dan, just a
Yes.
minute before you go on. I'm sorry. It looks like we have another raised hand, and I don't want to get away from the topic at hand. LaShonda has her hand raised.
Thanks, Monica. Hi, everyone. Dan, question about the OSHA 10 cards. You mentioned the cards are required to be uploaded to IWRS. Are the actual certification certificates of completion, will those suffice, or are grantees required to make sure that the cards are copied and uploaded?
The cards.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for clarifying.
Okay, and just one more thing, Dan, and I'm in the midst of replying to Scott, but so when you said that now the documentation must now be uploaded to IWRS, Scott asked, are you saying we should not just upload their high school diploma, GED, etc., but also, you know, the birth certificate, social security card, driver's license? And I was we do have potential PPI security breach concerns, Scott. So my response is actually, in addition to that documentation of high school completion, we're asking you to upload a document, preferably a driver's license or a state ID, that also proves name, age, and Illinois residency. So that's actually what we would be looking for. Dan, I didn't know if you would want to say anything in addition to that, or if that's sufficient for now until we go on further.
Yep, it's going to be part of the checklist that we're going to talk about right now. But yeah, just to, as long as it's been brought up, we do not want the Social Security card. That doesn't give us any of that identifiable information anyway. So that is something that we actively do not want you to upload. But you know, the ideal is a driver's license or state ID, because that does provide us with the individual's legal name, their date of birth, so we can verify age, and their address, so we can verify that they are a resident of Illinois.
Okay.
Dan, if I could please just add one point here that I think will be important. You will notice, as part of the conversation about people joining our program, they fill out an application. We do ask, it's not a requirement, we do ask that grantees, if possible, request the last 4 digits of a person's social security number to be entered in IWRS. That is not for eligibility requirements. The reason why that is there is because when they graduate, they carry both compliance credits and bid credits with them for contractors to hire them. And in order for those contractors to claim both compliance credits or bid credits on those individuals, the most ideal scenario is that they provide us the last 4 of the person's social security number to be able to identify and verify them, or their ID number, which is their Illinois Works ID number. But ideally, it will be the Social Security and the ID. But if it's not possible, then the ID number. But that's the reason why the last 4 of the Social Security number is important. But we certainly do not want their Social Security card uploaded into the individual's profile, nor do we want you keeping a copy of their Social Security card in your files. Okay, that's definitely not a requirement, and it would not be a good practice.
Okay. So Dan, it looks like Brittany has her hand raised, and if you could wait 2 seconds, Brittany, let me get to this question in the chat super quick. So for clarification, if a participant is incomplete, should the stipend goal be set to incomplete even if all of the earned stipends were paid out?
No, if all the earned stipends were paid out, then it can be moved to complete.
Thank you, Dan. Now, Brittany, if you would like to unmute, thank you.
Never mind.
If you're sure.
Yeah, never mind. I'm gonna wait until section 3. I think that's gonna answer my question. I'm just gonna hold it, and then if it doesn't, then I can store it in the chat.
All right.
That was good.
Yeah.
All right, so let's take a look at this checklist. So we are going to be sending everyone who is attending this call an email with a checklist. That will probably come at the end of this week. But the checklist will, for those of you that were here last year, last time we asked you to actually go in and tell us how many of each of these items you verified. That's not what we're asking for this time. Instead, we're asking for you to instead verify that it's been completed, right? Because we don't need a tally of the number of individuals, but we do need to know that it was completed. So we will send you this checklist. I'm going to show it to you in just a moment and go through it. But one of the things that's important to know is that individuals will have different requirements based on how far along through the program that they moved. I already mentioned that, you know, like for someone, for example, someone who is not enrolled status, their only requirement is that they have an application, right? So that would be the only thing we'd expect to see for an individual that has a status of not enrolled. Whereas a person that was enrolled, we'd expect to see all of the eligibility, all of the intake documents there. But we wouldn't expect to see, you know, necessarily like, you know, a transition document. And we definitely wouldn't expect to see an active tracking for anyone who didn't complete the programming. So let's take a look at what that form is. So the form, and this really follows very closely with the monthly compliance steps that we take a look at, right? So I know this is a little small. Again, we're going to be emailing you the PDF itself, but you know, the first 10 steps are essentially what we look at for enrollment verification. You know, is the application completed in IWRS? Were both interviewer sheets uploaded and scored correctly? Was the average interview score entered correctly with the interviewer names? You know, is the high school diploma uploaded, or you know, high school transcript, GED, HiSET, etc. We verify that the participant was placed in the correct cohort. We verify that the commitment agreement was uploaded and signed and dated correctly. The wraparound support services assessment had to be completed, and the orientation career assessment had to have been completed. And again, the one in here for closeout that wasn't part of that monthly compliance is the uploading of the eligibility document. So ideally the driver's license or state ID, but it could be a birth certificate or you know, some other documents that you know, verify the name, age, and residency. So we do that for intake, we do that for training services, and then there's a portion of program completion and follow-up. So I mentioned here that, you know, it'll depend on the individual status, which of these apply to them. So again, not enrolled, just issue number 1. Do they have a completed application? An administrative withdrawal, well, they went through the interview, right? They should have an interviewer score and interviewer names entered. They were offered a spot in the program, but that's where it stops, right? They weren't placed into a cohort. They certainly didn't, you know, fill out a wraparound service assessment or an orientation career assessment. So we're not checking those items. And so we'll have a little legend here for each of the different statuses. And which of the checklist items applies to them. So it's important to keep in mind that, you know, the grant managers are going to be verifying all of this data in the closeout process. So it will save everyone a lot of time if your data quality management system personnel review this on their own, right? And I don't mean to be overly simplistic about it, but it's a lot easier for your organization to see, oh, there's not a signed commitment agreement uploaded, we need to do that, than for you to wait for the Illinois Works grant managers to say there's not a signed commitment agreement, for us to enter that into a spreadsheet, send it to you only to be flagged that you needed to do what you were supposed to do in the first place. So that process winds up stretching this out for weeks. And again, it's holding up the release of your grant your closeout funding. And I should mention, and well, we'll get to it. I'll talk about it when we talk about the closeout funding. But this whole process, will be a back and forth, hopefully just once or twice. And that will resolve all of the flags. And again, a big portion of that will be if you can clear all of the flags on the monthly closeout or on monthly compliance reports, then that will eliminate much of the back and forth that would need to occur. Any questions about this closeout checklist that we're going to be sending?
There are no questions in the chat.
Okay.
Oh, I do have a question. This is Robert, and I had a question. Several slides, I apologize. But you talked about the completion of the satisfaction survey. So we send out the link. How do we know that we have a 75% completion because we don't get those back? They go directly to you.
Right. I had mentioned that we will send all of the grantees information with what their current completion percentage is in
Okay.
January.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And just to piggyback on that, Hector asked the question in the survey regarding how will you know who has completed the survey? You won't. We'll be able to see how many people have returned a survey on behalf of HICIA. So obviously we know your completion number, so we know how many surveys we should receive and can check to see what 75% of that is. But the survey is anonymous, so you won't actually know who has completed the survey.
But wouldn't it be easier for us to know who completed the survey so we can target those participants and say, hey, can you just fill this out for us?
Easier perhaps, but not the current procedure. So just dealing with what we have at this moment in particular, you won't know who's completed it.
Okay, because I could call a participant like, yeah, Hector, I got it, I did it. They might not have clicked send, and now now you see we just something maybe we fix next year or we'll do before program. But like, how are we gonna know? Like, we need to know, and if we're gonna get penalized on it because a participant doesn't click send, lies, or just doesn't care, that's not fair to us.
Dan, can I hijack for a sec?
Hector, can I just respond to that real quick? The satisfaction survey is part of our evaluation methodology, and in order for us to get candid, complete responses from the participants, we obviously are offering them for them to submit it anonymously. Our dashboard allows us to see how many surveys we have received. They can, at the end of the survey, provide their name if they want to, so that we know not only who might have completed it, but in case they want us to circle back to them if they want to discuss any concerns that they have. That is not going to change. This is an evaluation methodology. What I suggest instead is the practice that is used for completing the survey. These individuals, before they go through graduation events, before they disengage from your program, take 30 minutes. I mean, even colleges and high schools do that all the time, right? Where before the students leave, they disengage, they take 30 minutes, and then they're like, here's the link, okay, complete the survey. Once you have completed the survey, you can leave, right? So that practice will ensure that the majority, if not all of them, complete the survey. But we unfortunately cannot change the methodology of granting them anonymity for completing the survey and being candid, very candid about their evaluation and scoring of the program they went through. It's specifically designed, strategically designed to do that. So unfortunately, we're not going to do that. But the practice of how it gets deployed, implemented, collected, completed, I think can certainly change, and it can be very successful just following a process like the one I mentioned.
All right, we'll start doing that for next round.
All right, so the closeout funds. So we've mentioned several times that this is a dedicated part of your grant award, or in terms of receiving your grant award. For most grantees, it makes up 10% of the overall award. So, you know, a $500,000 grant, the closeout funds would be worth $50,000. Now, it does mention here that percentage changes if a capital advance had been approved. And so there are two different types of capital advances. There's the traditional capital advance, and then there's a capital advance for um, organizations that were admitted into the accelerator program. But the same information applies. So it does reduce that 10%. I think as low as it goes down to as low as 2%. But it is still an important part of the performance reimbursement eligibility. And I will also mention that it says here that, you know, some or all of that, closeout fund will not be awarded if the data is not accurate or if the grantee fails to update the data as instructed. And there's two sides to that coin. One is not only can it restrict the closeout funds themselves, but if it turns out that an individual, you cannot produce the eligibility information for that participant, or the OSHA 10 card, or any of the required information, and well, I'll just leave it at that. Not only does that impact the ability to receive the closeout fund itself, but it causes us to have to roll back that verification. And every time we roll back a verification, on average, that's $2,700 that we have to pull back for an enrollment. And if we pull back, so if we pull back a completion, we also have to pull back any transitions that were associated with it, because you cannot be awarded a transition without a completion. And if we pull back an enrollment, then we have to pull back a completion and transition that was awarded with it. So in some cases, because we cannot verify the eligibility of an individual and we have to remove their enrollment, we may have to remove, if they had graduated, we'll remove their completion and possibly transition as well. So it can not only mean that you're not going to receive the closeout funding, but it can mean that we also have to pull back upwards of $10,000 from what had already been approved. So this is very important and serious. On the other hand, what actually winds up happening, before anyone thinks it's doom and gloom, what actually winds up happening is we're actually able to verify more as we go through closeout. Okay, as you clear these flags, every flag that gets cleared, typically that means, oh, okay, now we can authorize this enrollment. And we were just waiting to do the enrollment. The person, everything needed for completion was already verified. So the moment we are able to verify the completion, it triggers everything down the road. And now it's $10,000 going toward the grantee. And again, this is separate from the closeout funds. But it still can impact grantees very heavily. So that I wanted to stress how important all of this is, and adhering to the closeout process, and clearing up any of the required data elements that we suggest, and certainly any flags that we provide to you. So just a last thought about the process. I know we're going a little long here, but once the closeout process is completed, and again, we're shooting for March here, then those closeout funds will become part of the grantee's reimbursement maximum, at which point it'll follow the established process. The financial grant managers within Illinois Works will work through that process with your PFR and your general ledger, your reimbursement, your expenses, and be able to disperse those funds from the Office of the Comptroller. So does anyone, that was everything we had for our presentation. Does anyone have any questions about the closeout funds specifically? I'm gonna hand it back over to Norman to wrap up, and if there are anything else that he'd like to add.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks, Dan. Thank you very much for joining us today. Just a reminder, we will be sending out the recording of this meeting as soon as it's available, along with the slides that we used today. So those will be going out to the people that enrolled. If you, in the meantime, have any other questions related to these items, please do not hesitate to send out an email to your grant manager. We'll be more than happy to answer your questions. I just want to emphasize as we close that what's important here is for us to be able to finish the closeout process as early as possible, following the steps that we just described, so that we can move on and focus exclusively on ensuring that there is a successful onboarding of all grantees at the beginning of the year, both administratively and also with technology and such. So thank you very much again for joining us. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.